There we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inspiring Hope. I'm Lois Hermann, your host, and I'm here to shine the light on people who are making a difference in our world. And today we have an interesting group of people because these are fans of this amazing Brandon Joe Williams, known by many as one stupid fuck.
Good job, Will.
Isn't that funny to hear? Isn't it funny to hear it like that? Isn't that silly? Too good.
I've got all kinds of questions. Sharon and Leslie have the great questions pertinent to what it is that you're doing. I want to know about who you are, and I want to know, where did that come from? Your online presence, kind of memorable. What inspired you to use that name, and what message are you really sending with that?
I had that URL. So I've been in marketing and sales for a long time. And I went through and I read a million books, and I've done a million, sales related courses online and stuff like that. And I always hated sales. I hated what I was being taught in sales, which is say whatever needs to be said, remove objections to the close, then they close, then they unclose 2 days later and you have to reclose them, and they're terrified the whole way through, and you just like it's just awful. And I read a book back during that time period. I was reading all these books, and I was just like, gosh, I really just don't like most of this. But I started kind of using it a little bit, but then I was just kind of like, I just really don't like it. And then I read a book by a woman. It was the only sales book by a woman I've ever read in my life. It's called Uncensored Sales Strategies, and it's written by a woman who ran the biggest brothel. It wasn't a brothel, it was an escort service in New York City. Her name is Sydney Biddle Barrows, and she ran this escort company like an empress for like 15 years in New York City. And it was like the highest class, super ultra high end escort service. Like the most beautiful women in the world, dressed to the absolute maximum. And it's like the Rolls Royce of escort services, right? And she did that for 15 or 20 years, and this guy who I love, he was the master of sales back when you had what's called back of the room sales or magazine sales. His name is Dan S. Kennedy. He was the Russell Brunson of the 80s and early 90s. He wrote a lot of books, and he still does, and he has this whole thing called No BS Marketing. Fantastic books. He has books on entire demographics. He has books on price strategy. He has books on the perfect sales letter, which was his original huge big book that made him really famous in the 80s. And ironically enough, Russell Brunson was born out of Dan S. Kennedy's material, the whole ClickFunnels guy. And during that time period, he had met Sydney Biddle Barrows somehow, and he was so impressed by her knowledge of what she had done with this as an empress, essentially in New York City with this escort service, that he basically kind of twisted her arm to write this book. And the foreword of the book is actually written by Dan S. Kennedy.
Okay.
Inside this book, Sydney Biddle Barrows, she basically describes sales as three different subclasses. Subclass number one is brute force. Subclass number two is consensual. And then subclass number three is romance. And the two aspects of the book that she basically says throughout the whole book is how to make the entire marketing to sales line of any business linear and essentially turn it into like a beautiful romance novel, essentially.
Okay.
And it just completely shifted everything in my world. And it was the book that got me to kind of take all the other books and go, these go in the trash can. And at that point, I was just reading Dan S. Kennedy and anyone that Dan S. Kennedy recommended. That was basically it. I was done with everybody else. I threw everything else in the trash can. And the years go by, and because of this information primarily, I became very, very successful as a salesperson. Um, and I applied. I read, probably 28 or 30 books by Dan S. Kennedy. I read a lot of other books too. A lot of really wonderful books. One of the ones I can think off the top of my head that was really impactful is How to Argue and Win Every Time by Jerry Spence. He was the attorney that defended the guy in Waco in the Waco incident and won. Um, Mind-blowing book. I mean, wow. It's a philosophy book essentially, if you ask me. So fast forward, many years, successful career, the whole 9 yards, everything. I started to, I had never had like my own entire thing. I had never had like my own entire thing. It was always, I had these ideas. I would have to go to whoever it was that was in charge. I would have to ask them if I could do it. And then I would be told it's either too wild or too crazy or too goofy or too something or too whatever. Right.
Right.
And it's got to be watered down. It's got to be watered down. Everything's got to be watered down. Everything's got to be watered down. You got to water it all down. Everything's got to get just whitewashed all the time, constantly. And I spent 10 years of my life just fighting people over not whitewashing my ideas. So fast forward to 2021 or something like that, or 2020, and I decided that I was going to do something on my own, and the brand for that thing was going to be One Stupid Fuck. And I already knew that, and I bought the URL, and I had it sitting there, but I wasn't sure what it was going to be yet. But I knew that was what I was going to use. That the branding came before even the service or product, which is ridiculous. But that's just kind of, I don't necessarily recommend that, but that's just kind of how mine went down, right? And the branding was already there. So by the time I had started doing all this, I launched my website on March 14th of 22. That was the website. We didn't have any branding. I didn't have any of the photos and the pickles and all this kind of stuff, right? That wasn't until after I did the 1.0 course, which was released on July 2nd of 2022. Right after that, probably by August, is when I started to design the logos and everything. And then by about the end of August is when we had all the logos done and all the branding was done. And then that was what to be my branding now today. And that's basically the story behind it.
And how does all that tie in with the reclaiming the sovereignty and questioning about the legal systems? And was there a specific awakening moment that caused you to do that, or was that also a gradual unfolding?
Yeah, I was being I had a landscaping company that I had taken over with a couple friends of mine. And I was very excited about it. And I put a lot of work into it. We had gotten it off the ground and it was making some money and we were having a lot of fun with it and goofy videos. We actually, my brainchild for the landscaping company was garden gnomes. So if you go on to Droughtscape LA, and you look at on Instagram or something like that, and you might need to scroll back a little bit because it's not. I haven't been there in a little while, so the goofiness level has gone down quite a bit. Now it's much more clean and professional. But if you go back, you'll see what I was doing was I was dressing up in silly outfits such as the Grinch or Christmas or Halloween or whatever. And we were sneaking onto our clients' properties and we were leaving garden gnomes on their properties.
I love it.
So we had this whole so garden gnomes became like the whole thing. And it was like we used to say like no gnome what I'm saying. And everything revolved around garden gnomes, and that became like our thing. And then we knew our clients by which gnomes they had. So it was really fun. So I was having a lot of fun. We're having a blast. And then the evil villain comes into the story, right? Which is the Employment Development Department, which is the payroll mafia out here in California. And they decided they wanted to trespass onto one of our properties. And it wasn't even our property. It was our job site, but it was the client's property, right? So it's like a double trespass. And just start interrogating my performers. I don't call them employees. I call them performers. And it's they started saying, hey, you need to fill out these like long forms of like how much money you're making and revenue and all this. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And I was talking to some lawyers and accountants, and they said, oh, don't worry about that. Just make a payment plan. Because shortly after that, they started sending me bills for $65,000, and then they were sending me bigger bills. And I was really scared. And I had a friend of mine who was a woman who had been trying to tell me about all the sovereignty stuff for a couple of years. And I just said, no, I said, you're crazy. I'm not going to get involved in that. You're crazy. You're going to be in jail. CIA is going to come down rappelling off of helicopters one of these days through your skylights. And I just didn't see it as a realistic thing. Right. But then by the time the EDD was really coming, that's when I decided to go and visit Nancy Kramer. And that's sort of how the whole thing began. I started to read a lot of books because I wanted to feel really confident before taking any action. So I went on Amazon and I bought every single book that I could possibly even find on anything that would be even remotely related to any of this, which is about 26 or 28 books. And then I read them between September of 21 and March,
Wow, fast track.
February. So
Mhm.
it's probably from September to February of 22 is when I read all those books. Um, and then by the time March hit, I was like all systems go, all engines full blast, and I ended up doing like almost everything I teach all within that first month in March. Plus, I launched my website. So March and April was like the most insane thing ever because it was just I was doing 8 million different tests and projects and experiments, and then I also launched my website, and then we were kind of going like that for a little while, and then like I said, July 2nd was the first course, and then right after that is when I got the branding, and then in August I also hired my first publicist, and then that's when I started going on shows, and I've pretty much been going on shows 2 to 3 days a week, almost nonstop. There has been some breaks of 4 or 5 months, maybe a couple times, but mostly 2 or 3 shows a week since like September of 2022. Yeah,
There's a lot of interest in what you have to share,
yeah,
all about the deceptive nature of legal language and corporate government. Uh,
yeah.
what is your message? What do you wish more people understood about how our words are used for control?
The two main areas are the monetary system and the citizenship system.
Okay.
Americans are not aware of the fact that there are two types of citizen. There's the state citizen and there's the U.S. citizen category. Everyone is saying they are U.S. citizens. The U.S. citizen category was created through a case called the Slaughterhouse Cases in 1873, and it was created specifically for the released Negro slaves that were released after the 13th Amendment, and they had no citizenship. The original Naturalization Act, the original piece of legislature from originally 1790, and then it went through a few updates, and then the final update was 1802, states that in order to be an original actual American, you have to be what's called a free white person. And that doesn't just mean the color of your skin, it has more depth to it. It pretty much just means a European. That's actually more clearly when you start digging into all the definitions in court cases of European descent. Pretty much. There are darker skinned people, like, for example, that maybe the Moroccans or the Moors, that may look quite dark, but legally they would be legally classified in the law as a free white person. And the situation is that the state citizens are the actual original Americans, whereas U.S. citizen is an entirely different class that does not have any of the rights that people think they have. And people ask questions such as, how is taxation legal? How is it legal that I have to have a driver's license? How is it legal that I have to have a concealed carry permit? How is it that I have to get a license to get married? How is it that I have to have a business license? How is any of this even possible? The answer is because you're classifying yourself as somebody who's not actually an American. It's an entirely separate class that was created by Congress, essentially, and it's called the U.S. citizen category. And the full breakdown and description of what that category means and what it's composed of and why it was created is found in two court cases. The court case number one is called Dred Scott versus Sanford, which comes from 1857. And then the second case is the Slaughterhouse Cases, which comes from 1873. Those two cases break down all the information as to how, why, when, and what it means that we have two different citizenship classes in this country. People think they are Americans, but they say they are U.S. citizens. A U.S. citizen is not an American. That's the first subject in a nutshell. The second subject is the fact that people think that our monetary system, people think we have money, and people think that Federal Reserve notes are money. They absolutely are not. Federal Reserve notes, the green things in your wallet, they're actually just securities, and they fall under all the exact same specifications as any other security. They fall under the exact same specifications as anything you're going to see on Wall Street. They are what's called negotiable instruments. Instrument means a document, and negotiable just means it has value and can be transferred. So if you say negotiable instruments in English, it's a document that can be transferred that has value.
That would be traded.
That can be traded at value, with value, right? There are two subclasses of negotiable instruments. There is the unconditional promise to pay, and there is the unconditional order to pay. The unconditional promise to pay is called a note. Ding, 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 ding. Just like what you see on one of these things, Federal Reserve note,
Yep.
Right? The second class is called a draft. And the body of law that covers all of the information about negotiable instruments in America is called the Uniform Commercial Code, and it's Article 3, meaning like the third chapter or third section of that body of law called the Uniform Commercial Code, which tells you everything you need to know under the sun, moon, and stars about how to transfer, negotiate, manufacture unconditional promises and orders to pay, aka currency.
And how many people do you think are currently aware of all this? And Sharon brought this to our attention, and Leslie's been really learning about it too and really immersed in it. What do you envision as far as waking up the people of America to this old awareness, the original awareness, to make them out of the lie, the stupor?
Well, America is essentially in this position where in today's society, it's basically extremely, like, it's basically racist to a level that you can't even comprehend. The racism is so unbelievable, and nobody even knows it's there. Now, when you start to read old cases, like for example, if you read Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857, in today's world, I mean, you're going to literally gasp out loud how horrible these things are that they're talking about. But you have to kind of stop and put yourself into that time period, 1857, right? And when you start to do that, and you start to look at the history of our country, and you start to look at the history of where our country came from, which is an English country, right? And then you see that common law, slavery, racism, all these things came from England into America, and we're still here after we broke off. That's really so racism and slavery, when it specifically comes to the black race of African descent, because when you start looking up the definitions of, for example, the word Negro, like I said earlier, it's a legal word. And one of the definitions of the term Negro actually says Negro means all colored persons, but not all colored persons are Negro. And when you start getting into it farther and farther and farther, it basically, the definition is that it has to have a certain amount of African blood in the colored person for them to be legally considered a Negro. And then the next question you ask yourself is, well, how in 1857 were they figuring out what percentage of African blood someone had? And that's where the whole thing kind of falls off a cliff and becomes very funny, because the real truth is there is no definition for Negro. The real truth is that the definition of Negro comes from eugenics. And they probably just had some weird, goofy, pseudo-scientific way where they would do bloodletting, or I don't know exactly how it was. Eventually, I'll probably figure that out in my research. Probably some goofy, weird thing that they used to do that if I were to, when I figure it out and I were to if I were to talk about it on a show, people in today's day and age would just laugh hysterically. It's like one of those things, right? Like if I go on, this is a good question. If I go on Grok and I ask, back in 1857, the definition of the word Negro legally meant a person of 1/8 or more African blood. How was this proven, and what scientific things did they do at that time period in order to attempt to prove this in a legal fashion to be used in a court of law? And normally I do a screen share. I can do a screen share and you guys can walk through this with me because I've never done this before. It says that you've disabled screen sharing, which it's probably going to be very difficult for you to figure out how to do that, but
Nope. You can do it. You can go.
okay. There we go. So this is what it's giving me. We'll see if it gives me anything good. It's been pretty good to me recently. So the legal definition of Negro in some U.S. states, particularly the South, often relied on the conclusion of blood quantum, where a person with 1/8 or more African ancestry, equal to one great-grandparent, was classified as a Negro or colored. This definition was rooted.
That's interesting. Okay.
This definition was rooted in the one-drop rule, or hypodescent, a social and legal principle that assigned individuals with any African ancestry to the lower status racial category, regardless of their appearance or other ancestry. However, proving African ancestry in a court of law during this period was not based on rigorous scientific methods as we understand them today. Instead, it relied on a combination of social, visual, and documentary methods, often steeped in subjective judgment and racial bias. Below, I outline now how this was approached and the scientific methods, or lack thereof, used at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we start getting into the one-drop rule, which I've never heard of before. Let's see what it says here. The one-drop rule, though not formally codified until the early 20th century in many states, was emerging in the 19th century as a way to maintain racial hierarchies and enforce slavery and later segregation. In 1857, laws in states like Virginia defined a Negro or mulatto as someone with 1/8 or more African ancestry, as seen in statutes from the early 1700s onward. The infamous Dred Scott versus Sanford decision of 1857 further reinforced racial classifications by denying citizenship to people of African descent, regardless of their status as free or enslaved, solidifying the legal importance of racial categorization, right? So let's see if we can find actual information on how they did this. Visual inspection, skin color, hair texture, facial features.
Or
So
or the whole concept of, well, their grandfather was or whatever. But
yeah,
a lot of the slave owners were they had children with their slaves.
yes.
A lot
And
of
those are called mulattoes. That's actually there's actually a legal if a white man has a child with a they literally have definitions. For a male it's a Negro, for a female it's a negress.
Mhm,
Those are the legal terms.
mhm.
That legally that baby legally would be what's called a mulatto. That's actually how that works, right? So this is very interesting, though. I wanted to bring look at this. This one's very interesting. I could totally see this. Community testimony. Witnesses, often neighbors or acquaintances, were called to testify about a person's perceived race based on their appearance, behavior, or social associations. If someone was known to associate with African Americans or live in a community identified as colored, this could be used as evidence. Now, I know enough of these court cases to know that this is probably true. I'm very skeptical of AI, artificial intelligence. Grok's been pretty good to me recently. A lot of what it's been giving me is pretty good, and I would need to go deeper to triple verify all of this.
Yep.
But I've read a lot of old cases, and I'm telling you, the chance that this is true is extremely high. It doesn't surprise me even in the slightest.
And this is all before even women were authorized,
That's
as
correct.
citizens too. Women were not considered. They didn't have the right to vote until even after the the colored or the Negro were allowed to vote. So
That's
that
correct, right?
1910, 1918 or something like that. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. And there's even a case in the late 1800s, I believe 1884, where a woman tried to be admitted to the bar.
Mhm.
It's called Bradwell versus, I forget the name of the case. Let me see if I still have it. No, I don't have it up anymore.
That's
Anyways,
that's all right.
she
Yeah.
wasn't able to because the Supreme Court basically said no. And they didn't say it necessarily based off of her. Um, Actually, you know what? I do want to. Samuel Freeman Miller. This is the guy who was giving the final opinion in the Slaughterhouse cases. This is the guy who, when the Slaughterhouse cases was finalized and delivered, this is the one where it split citizenship into two different classes and it created the special U.S. citizen class. This is the guy who was giving that opinion, right? If we go to maybe it's, let's see here, case in, let's see here, case, give me just 1 second. I think it's this one. Yeah, this one here, Bradwell v. Illinois. Bradwell v. Illinois. Let's see. We'll go to Google Scholar and we'll type in Bradwell v. Illinois. Bradwell v. State. So you can see here, this is after the Slaughterhouse cases. It's a pretty short thing. That's why I'm going to go through this one with you guys. You can see here. So what happened is the record in this case is not very perfect, but it may be fairly taken that the plaintiff asserted her right to a license to practice law
Mhm.
on the grounds, among others, that she was a citizen of the United States and that having been a citizen of Vermont at one time, she was, in the state of Illinois, entitled to any right granted to citizens of the latter state. So this shows you that there are two completely separate classes of citizenship that are completely lost in the American culture and the American legal system. So she's saying she's a citizen of the United States,
And
but
Vermont.
but the court is saying she's a citizen of Vermont and then moved to a different state of Illinois after having been a citizen of Vermont.
Right.
So you have these two different state citizenships and then you have a federal citizenship all involved, right? The court having overruled these claims of right founded on the clauses of the federal constitution. So people don't realize that there's two different constitutions. The first constitution is a constitution for the United States of America, which is the one that people think of when they hear the word constitution. When you read the Slaughterhouse cases, Mr. Miller describes the 14th Amendment as a completely different constitution called the Federal Constitution. So you have one constitution for white people that are citizens of a state, and then you have a completely different constitution for released Negroes that are U.S. citizens. The federal constitution is literally just the 14th Amendment. The Constitution of the United States, which comes from 1776, has absolutely nothing to do with U.S. citizens. And the federal Constitution, which is the 14th Amendment, has absolutely nothing to do with white state citizens. It's two completely different structures. So the court, having overruled these claims of right founded on the clauses of the federal Constitution, basically what that means in English is you're a state citizen. You have no right to the 14th Amendment. That's what he's saying, right? So as regards to the provisions of the Constitution that citizens of each state shall be entitled to all the privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states, the plaintiff in her affidavit has stated very clearly a case to which it is inapplicable. So in English, he's saying you're a citizen of a state, but you're trying to use the 14th Amendment, the federal Constitution, to defend you. That Constitution has absolutely nothing to do with you. And this case is cited as a case to defend women's rights. This case has nothing to do with women's rights. It was a woman who was denied to become a member of the bar and licensed to practice law. Yes, that's true, but it has nothing to do with her gender. Later on in the case, they talk about gender. There's actually a dissenting judge here who goes on and on and on and talks about the different roles of men and women in the society. I think it's pretty interesting. So, for example, the claim of the plaintiff, who is a married woman, to be admitted to practice as an attorney and counselor at law is based on the supposed right of every person, man or woman, to engage in any lawful employment for a livelihood. The Supreme Court of Illinois denied the application on the ground that by the common law, which is the basis of the laws of Illinois, only men were admitted to the bar. So what he's saying is, on the state level, because you're a state citizen, there are state laws that say you can't. Now, keep in mind, this is a dissenting. So the way it works is, when they're, oh no, that's not dissenting. It's just additional information. So this is just like, so it says here, affirm. So basically, all the justices agree for this part. And then it says judgment affirmed. And then below that, if any specific justice wants to chime in and say anything more, sometimes it's called a dissenting opinion, meaning like one guy is not into it, he doesn't like it, and he wants to tell people why, even though a dissenting opinion isn't really as binding as the actual upper part, because the upper part is like a done deal. This is now the law, essentially, for the whole country when it's done at the Supreme Court level. The dissenting part or anything below this part is pretty much just, yeah, you can use it, but it doesn't have the same teeth or bite as what's above the affirmed or whatever, right?
So this has been going on for a long time. And now all of a sudden you are involved in helping to bring awareness to people. And how do you think that's going? Are more and more people waking up to this or changing their situation in order to break this? Or does this need to, how do we as a society break free from this?
Well, once you're aware, essentially, of the situation,
Mhm.
you can't say you're a U.S. citizen anymore, and the reason why, it becomes a felony. So, if you continue to say that you're a U.S. citizen, you won't be prosecuted. The government will never prosecute you. You are becoming an unprosecuted felon. And the way that works is 18 USC 911, citizen of the United States. Whoever falsely and willfully, this is the part right here, and willfully, represents himself to be a citizen of the United States shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both. So when I explain these things to you,
Yeah.
you are now becoming willful of the situation. You were not willful prior to this.
Mhm.
So you were not an unprosecuted felon. But now that I'm teaching you this information from this point forward, you will be falsely and willfully representing yourself to be a citizen of the United States. You will probably never get prosecuted for that, but you are essentially an unprosecuted felon.
So if I'm not a citizen of the United States, but I reside in America, even though I was born in Japan,
Are you naturalized?
according to my documents, I am.
Were you born in an embassy or a federal zone in Japan?
I was born on a military base.
Yeah, so that's a whole different, yeah. So that's a whole deep, crazy, wild, insane rabbit hole that I'm not even going to try to. So you are, yeah, so that's a whole thing.
Yeah, my
That's a whole thing.
parents,
I'm aware of a lot of this information, but I'm also aware that I don't think even the Department of State really knows how to handle these kinds of people.
that's
So
part of my life.
Born in Germany, so yeah,
yeah,
thing for her. So yes.
so um, yeah, that's you were born in a military base in Japan, is that right?
Right.
Yeah. So uh, what state were your parents living in prior to being deployed? Like, where was your mother? Where was your it was your father? So where were you guys living? What state?
My parents were from West Virginia.
And had they been born in West Virginia?
Yes.
And have you guys been in West Virginia since their birth?
Since their birth. Yeah, they lived there. And then
And and your mother was living in West Virginia when you were born?
no, she was living in Japan. I was born in Japan. She was living in Japan.
So when you came back from the military, did you go back to West Virginia?
Briefly, yes.
Okay, so you are a citizen of West Virginia.
Okay.
The Department of State won't be able to figure this out for you. It's literally not even within their own. They're. I'm assuming you've been dealing with complexities and difficulties and confusion with this your whole life. Am I right or am I wrong?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you are, because the way it works is, if you look in the Slaughterhouse Cases, I will show this to you. Actually, this is really fascinating. I think I've only met maybe one other person ever who fits this classification. So if we go to the Slaughterhouse Cases, we're going to go back to Google Scholar. This is the case where the U.S. citizen category was created, and we're going to go to Slaughterhouse. The first line of the 14th Amendment, 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. If we type that into subject to the jurisdiction, we're going to go down to where it says console. There we go. He's talking about that first line, Mr. Miller, in the Slaughterhouse Cases. And he says here, this line's very unique, that its main purpose was to establish the citizenship of the Negro can admit of no doubt. Now, this is the part that everyone's missing when it comes to your citizenship. The phrase subject to its jurisdiction was intended to exclude from its operation children of ministers, consuls, and citizens or subjects of foreign states. Your mother and your father were both citizens of West Virginia.
Right.
So they're going to say to the Department of State that you're a citizen of the United States. You're not, because you were born essentially in an area that's really not part of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. This is the part that's very, very unique about your situation right here. It's not really a part of the United States. So you would actually gain the citizenship of your parents automatically from the foreign jurisdiction of West Virginia.
And when I traveled back to Japan, they told me I could actually establish myself as a Japanese citizen if I so chose, because it was born on soil. Their laws were born on soil, not the patriarchal lineage. And I said, what would that give me if I was to establish dual citizenship? And they said, well, you could pick the shorter line in customs. And I said, I'm good with that. Thank you very much.
Well, what's funny about that too is that when you start researching the state citizenship versus U.S. citizenship, because your situation is so unique, they could say that even if you were a state citizen, you'd be a naturalized state citizen. I don't think that's true, but if they did try to pull that on you, a naturalized state citizen cannot hold any other citizenships anywhere else in the world. Only federal U.S. citizens can hold multiple citizenships. If you decide that you would like to start identifying yourself as a state citizen, which according to what you've told me, I think that's more accurate, a state citizen of West Virginia,
Even though
you
I've only lived there for a brief period of time.
doesn't matter. Doesn't
Okay.
matter. Yeah. Especially with the way your parents are set up. It's a really clear cut. It's super, super clear cut. They were born there, they lived there, they had you there. It doesn't get any, and in the eyes of the law, it doesn't get any more clear than that.
So, Brandon, that brings to the question of the passport in the stars on the passport card. So my husband got 5 stars. I got 3 stars, and I filled out everything, sent it in, same post office. And so now I'm thinking, because of what Lois is
I don't
saying,
think the stars mean anything.
you don't? Okay, because
I used to years ago, but now I don't.
okay.
I've seen a
Well,
lot of guys with 3 stars get all sorts of crazy things to happen, and cops treating them like they're, Saudi princes and the whole 9 yards. And I've seen it all. So I just don't think they mean anything, frankly.
okay. Well, that's good, because I put that my parents were not U.S. citizens, but my father was born in China. So I thought, oh, because she was just saying that, so I thought, I don't know.
The problem with all citizenship and nationality is the Department of State has completely forgotten and removed state citizenship from all of its everything. Like if you go on the Foreign Affairs Manual and you start digging around in the Foreign Affairs Manual, which is the local laws that govern the whole passport system, there's so many areas in the Foreign Affairs Manual that are marked as classified. Why are there so many aspects to the Foreign Affairs Manual classified? Why? I believe the reason why there's so many of them that are still classified is because they're talking about state citizenship inside of those areas. And there's probably a lot of different areas. So we live in a world where the idea that there is a state citizenship isn't even part of the culture. It's not part of civics. It's not part of any forms. It's not part of the DS-11 passport application. It's not a part of any area of the Foreign Affairs Manual that we can access that's been unclassified. It's not a part of Title 8, which is the United States Code section on nationality and aliens. There's just no information about state citizenship. And when I started to learn the various court cases associated with a lot of the citizenship stuff, and I started to go back and started to read them, that's when I started to find a lot of this stuff. And then as you just saw in that case, just for like 5 seconds, we were just reading it for 5 seconds. It's extremely clear that there are 2 types of citizenship. They're completely separate. The main basis for the 2 different classes of citizenship is white and black. So that's why I'm telling you the basis of racism is it's more racist than you could literally ever even imagine. It's segregation on a level that having separate bathrooms couldn't even come within 25 football fields of, and nobody's even aware it's here. It's a complete ghost, but it's here. But no one can see it, smell it, taste it. It's like a boogeyman.
So what about the illegal, these people who are coming in the country, quote unquote, illegally and are being given U.S. citizenship or documents, that, driver's license or different documents that say that they're here based on something that's not truly legal. Where do they fit into all of this?
Well, the thing is that the term illegal alien is almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost impossible to have an illegal alien in America. And the reason why is because if I was French and I decided I wanted to come to America, I wouldn't naturalize as a U.S. citizen.
Okay.
I would naturalize as a state citizen. Now, if I was naturalizing as a state citizen, I would follow the Naturalization Act of 1802, which has absolutely nothing to do with the federal government or the Department of State at all whatsoever. There is no functionality in the government or at the Department of State at all whatsoever that has anything to do with, can deal with, can deny, approve, say yes to, or even respond to anything involving someone trying to naturalize as a state citizen. And the reason why is because U.S. citizenship is under the umbrella of the District of Columbia. All 50 states are considered independent sovereign nations. So in law, it's the same as saying, I'm going to naturalize to France, and then Italy is going to tell me whether or not I can or I can't. I'm going to go to Italy to get approval to naturalize into France. It's the same idea in law. Going to the District of Columbia to try to get approval to naturalize as a state citizen of California is insane, laughable, and hysterical, and ridiculous, and legally impossible.
I've attended legalization ceremonies, citizenship ceremonies for people who have worked and studied and gone through the whole process of becoming naturalized citizens. And that's really a big deal for them coming into the country, the legal way of doing it. But what you're saying is that that's not even applicable.
That's for U.S. citizens. That is for the same classification. It's a classification that was originally written in 1868 in the 14th Amendment, but it wasn't solidified until the judicial system fully interpreted what the 14th Amendment was saying. That final complete interpretation occurred on April 14th, 1873, in a case called the Slaughterhouse Cases. That opinion was delivered by the Honorable Samuel Freeman Miller. So Samuel Freeman Miller is the man who describes what these various things are, how they break down. Naturalizing into the country as a federal U.S. citizen would be done through all of those standardized ways. That's correct. One of the biggest differences between naturalizing as a federal U.S. citizen and naturalizing as a state citizen, the two big differences, well, there's really three. Number one is you have to be a free white person to naturalize into a state, which doesn't just mean color of your skin. It has a little bit more to it. If you're not considered a free white person, as per the definition, you do not have the ability to naturalize into a state. You only have the option to naturalize as a U.S. citizen. Number two, the 9th and 10th Amendment of the original 1776 Constitution was never reincorporated into the U.S. citizen category. There's a series of cases called the Incorporation Doctrine. And there's even parts of like the 5th Amendment and the 7th Amendment that have only been partially reincorporated into the U.S. citizen category. So people think by becoming a U.S. citizen, they're getting the 1776 Constitution. The 1776 Constitution has absolutely nothing to do with U.S. citizenship. The federal Constitution is the 14th Amendment. When you swear an oath to uphold the Constitution, when you're naturalizing as a U.S. citizen, you are swearing to uphold the 14th Amendment only. When you naturalize as a state citizen into a state, you are also going to pledge to uphold the U.S. Constitution. But when you do it as a state citizen, you are actually referring to the original 1776 Constitution. And in fact, the amendments that have nothing to do with you if you are naturalizing as a state citizen is the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment has nothing to do with you. You can't claim protections under the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is an entirely separate constitution for an entirely different class of citizenship.
So how does something not ratified gain so much traction?
And the scariest part of all this is Mr. Miller died in 1890. He died in the chair. Not literally. He was serving in the Supreme Court all the way up until the moment he died. I don't know if he died literally in the chair, but I'm talking metaphorically, he died in the chair. Okay. He sat on over 5,000 cases, and he taught himself law while he was practicing medicine as a doctor. Smart guy, successful guy. He taught himself law and made it all the way up into the chair of the Supreme Court justices from self-education. A brilliant man. He cared very, very much about the releasing of the slaves, and he worked for 20 plus years teaching himself law, getting into law, and then working his way up the ranks to become a Supreme Court justice. And pretty much the entire time he was doing all of that, it was all for the purpose of freeing the slaves. That's why he was doing it. So when the day came, April 14th, 1873, when the day came to deliver that final opinion, he wasn't the chief justice. He was an associate justice, but because of his background, because this was his baby, he was the one to deliver the final opinion of the court on April 14th, 1873. When he died in 1890, it seems like, from my perspective of all the research I've done, the idea that there's these two different classes of citizenship was basically gone within probably 10 to 15 years.
Buried with him.
So the idea, and the most depressing part about all this is that if he knew, if you were to bring him back to life, and then he were to look and see what happened, he'd drop dead again right there in front of you. He would be so upset and so shocked and so saddened that he would probably literally just he reincarnate him, take a look what happened, and he'd drop dead right there immediately.
I think
right?
that's true of most of our patriots that fought back in at the Revolutionary War. Yeah. If they would look to see what's going on right now, they would be very, very disappointed.
And I think that he's the same classification because you got to think, April 14th, 1873 is when he created this new citizenship class, and he created the federal constitution, or he named the federal constitution, because you got to think the legislature wrote the 14th Amendment, and then the judicial branch was just interpreting and clarifying what was said by the legislation. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way America's supposed to be. It's not like that now, but that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it was, right? So Mr. Miller didn't create the category. He interpreted what was written by the legislature as being the creation of that category, sort of. Now, again, he wanted to release these slaves so badly, and he had for so long, that he was probably a little bit over emotionally involved and over zealously reaching, trying to get that done, right? Sure. Because to this day, the most controversial case that has ever happened in the entire history of our entire country, from eminent judges, Supreme Court, everywhere, all the way up and down, everyone's pretty much in agreement. The most controversial case that we've ever had in this country since the dawn of the country's existence is the Slaughterhouse Cases. So almost no one knows about it, but the few people who do know about it, they know it's a goofball. They know it. Mm-hmm. It's not a secret. It is a secret, but it's not a secret at the same time, right? So this idea that we were talking about your friend and naturalization. So that was the second part. The third thing that's so unique about naturalizing as a state citizen versus a U.S. citizen is that a U.S. citizen can hold multiple citizenships. A state citizen, not only can they not hold any additional citizenships, they can't even have nationality, meaning allegiance. So the way that citizenship is structured is there's two levels. It's like a two-story building. The first floor is nationality. Nationality just means allegiance. I pledge allegiance to France. Bang, right away. Now you have French nationality. Nationality is that simple. It's literally just whoever you back, basically, right? Citizenship is after nationality is established, you're going a step farther, and now you're basically like subjugating yourself and becoming a more integral political aspect. You're plugging into like the legal system, it's more of like a depth of contract, shall we say, to make it simple. Okay. So when you have a state citizen versus a U.S. citizen, a U.S. citizen can have multiple allegiances and citizenships. A state citizen, not only can they not have any other citizenships, they can't even have any other nationalities.
Because they have chosen, they have focused, they have made.
It's like getting married. When you become a state citizen, it really is. It's like getting married. There are no other women, and if there are, it's over instantly.
So
if you so much as even look at another woman, we're done. That's how the original America, that's how the original state citizenship is structured. So if someone was French, or I think you said Japanese, your friend was Japanese. Is that right? Who was it that was it you, Leslie? You were saying a friend of yours? Oh, no, it was you, Lois. You said that a friend of yours came in and it was this big thing and it was this beautiful, what culture were they coming from?
No, I am a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and I have attended some naturalization ceremonies where there are like 70 something people that have gone through the whole process of becoming citizens or national, I guess they're national citizens.
So if you were becoming a citizen of West Virginia or a citizen of California rather than of the United States, through the naturalization process, you would have to actively negate and shed all allegiance or citizenship with the country you're coming from.
It's absolutely part of the oath that they take.
Yes. It is?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's part of the oath that they take when they declare national citizenship. It's part, I don't know the exact verbiage, but they declare that they release all allegiance to prior, and these are people from, they were like,
but that makes no sense because they still have passports and citizenships and all of it.
They all had to, that was all being changed. I mean, they went through a lot of study. They went through a lot of process, and it was a big to-do for these families. So it was just, I'm just curious how that all fits in with
holding a passport for any other country as a state citizen automatically negates your state citizenship.
Yeah, I don't know the state. I just know that this was a big thing to go through this nationalization process, and they did the pledge allegiance to America, and in addition rescinded all former alliances.
Well, isn't that because they're
That's so
becoming
strange.
U.S. citizens? They're not becoming state citizens. They're becoming U.S. citizens.
U.S. citizens, yeah, because I live in New Hampshire, so
that makes no sense. Because the thing is that. I mean, I would need to look into that more because that would mean automatically all other passports or citizenships would have to be ended at that time or prior to that point, especially if it's under oath. If it's under oath, then if you have a French passport in your pocket and you're standing there and you have your hand up at a naturalization service, and you say, under penalty of perjury, I hereby, blah, 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 and you walk out of there and you still have a French passport in your pocket, you are now an unprosecuted felon for perjury. So either that's the craziest, stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, and these people are all fucking insane and nobody has a clue and they've all got their head up their ass, or maybe there's something a little bit different about it that I'm missing, but you can't have that passport.
Yeah, I don't.
If you have a French passport, and I know next Tuesday I'm going in for a naturalization presentation, and I know that I'm gonna have to swear under penalty of perjury that I have eliminated citizenship and allegiance and nationality from France, I would be going down to the embassy or calling somebody or doing something to get rid of and annihilate that French passport prior to my appointment on Tuesday. If I can't get into the embassy or consulate, I'm going to be moving my naturalization seminar back or something because I can't go and commit perjury as the very first thing of becoming an American. Becoming an American is not christened through a felony.
So in your interpretation, how would you become an American? I mean, they hold these once a month in the state of New Hampshire,
You have to get rid of everything that attaches you to any other country, any nationality, any legal documentation, citizenship. On the state citizen side of the equation, if you read the 1802 Naturalization Act, it says that you have to actually swear them off by name. Like, and it includes things like princes, pontiffs, princesses. It's actually in the original text written that way. So if it's France, you would write like the president of France name. You would write any other allegiances or aspects that you may have had to France. If you were a member of the French Parliament, or if you were a member of an NGO that has something to do with French relationships, those would have to go too. Everything has to go on the state citizen side of the equation. On the federal U.S. citizen side of the equation, I mean, I didn't realize that they say this, but that's ridiculous. That means that all those people are felons immediately.
Well, it's probably because there's two citizenships going on at the same time that they're pledging.
You can't have a passport from any other country active at all and go in and swear under penalty of perjury that you have sworn off and eliminated all other nationalities and citizenship, because you haven't.
So how would you become a naturalized citizen if you were an immigrant from another country into America under your
As a state citizen?
as a state citizen? How would they become a state citizen if they were never born in the state?
You would follow the 1802 Naturalization Act. In order to naturalize as a state citizen, you have to be what's called a free white person. And you have to demonstrate good conduct. You have to get rid of all other foreign nationalities. So you'd have to get rid of your citizenship from the country that you're coming from. You would have to eliminate your passport, eliminate anything that would connect you to any other country. And at that point, you would pretty much just package it up and put it on a website. Because the thing is that you can't really even send it to the American government, because the American government has no ability to process or approve or deny or disapprove anything involving the naturalization of state citizenship. That's why you don't see it from anything from the government. The government behaves as though state citizenship doesn't even exist, because within the confines of its own legal system, it doesn't. California citizenship is considered citizenship of a foreign nation from United States. The term United States legally pretty much just means the District of Columbia and its U.S. territories and insular possessions and federal zones. And that's why being born in a military base in a foreign land is so complicated, because it's actually a federal zone. So it would fall under what's called 4 U.S.C. 72. 4 U.S.C. 72 says all offices attached to the seat of government shall be exercised in the District of Columbia and not elsewhere except as expressly provided by law. So basically, in law, no one knows this. No one understands this. And the Department of State is so confused about this. But from their perspective, anyone born on a military base that's within the jurisdiction of the national government basically essentially was born in the District of Columbia.
And so now District of Columbia has changed to the city of Washington. What do you
Oh, yeah, my question.
That's why you run into so much confusion, because from their perspective, you were born in the District of Columbia. They don't even really know how to even express that. But that's kind of sort of what they're trying to express when you talk to them. But in actual fact, if you go deeper and you know what state citizenship is, I would say, if I was in your position, I would fight to say that, no, I'm not a citizen of the United States because of what Mr. Miller says about and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and that my parents would actually fall into the classification of being citizens of a foreign state called West Virginia, and I'm actually a West Virginian, not a U.S. citizen. Which is extremely, they haven't seen anyone bring this kind of a conversation to the table since like 1890. So, you know, that's going to be a fun one. But it's 100% true. It's 100% true. If you said, no, I'm a United States citizen, they'll accept that probably pretty easily. Basically, that's saying that you're a citizen of the United States is the same thing as saying that you were born in the District of Columbia. It's saying basically the same thing. But I think the state citizenship category, especially with your parents being born and still in the same state they were both born, that's an extremely strong argument for state citizenship for you.
Because I have a paper that says born on foreign, so American born on foreign soil, signed by Henry Kissinger, believe it or not, who was the Secretary of State at the time. But
Oh, that's interesting.
oh yeah, with a great big seal and ribbon and all that kind of stuff. But I was an American citizen born on foreign soil, is the way
Yeah.
that they classified it. Yeah. So
In the legal world,
citizen, I was an American citizen or U.S.
In the legal world, that just means you were born in the District of Columbia in English.
Okay.
That's what that means in English.
Yeah, which DC was the foreign soil, but now they're changing it. What's your thoughts about DC being changed to the city of Washington? And Trump, the whole thing that happened the other day where Trump kind of came into the city of Washington with military force.
They've been trying to make the District of Columbia the 31st state forever. And they even have a whole website called, I think it's like dcstatehood.com or something like that. And they've been trying to do this for a long time.
Not Canada.
Not Canada. And the reason why DC will never become the 51st state is because of the Commerce Clause. Point number one of the Commerce Clause, basically the Commerce Clause is essentially how the federal government gets what's called plenary power in the states. The point number one of the Commerce Clause is commerce with foreign nations. Point number two of the Commerce Clause is commerce between the states, interstate commerce. And then point number three of the Commerce Clause is commerce with Indian nations or Indian tribes. Because Washington, D.C. is considered an entirely separate zone or nation, point number one of the Commerce Clause activates all the time because people say that they are United States citizens when they were inside of a state. If you say you're a United States citizen, that means you're a citizen of the District of Columbia. And then you say you're a resident, which means foreigner. The term resident means foreigner. There's an entirely different word called domicile. Domicile means that you're actually a citizen of where you are. Resident means you're someplace where your citizenship is not. You're an alien. That's why with the IRS, the term resident is never just resident, it's resident alien. You ever notice that? So outside of Title 26, which is the Internal Revenue Code, they just say the word resident. But if you look in the tax code, they don't say the word resident, they say the word resident alien. There is no such thing as just resident by itself.
Not just the reptilians.
So a resident or resident alien of California means that you are a foreigner. You're an alien. The word resident and alien mean the same thing.
It's crazy stuff. Crazy stuff.
So everyone's walking around saying they're a resident of California, signing their documentation for their home or their rental or their apartment saying that they are a resident or a residence or it's residential when it's not. I don't have a residence. I've written affidavits and put them into court cases. I don't have a residence. I never did. I'm native born. I'm not naturalized. I've been domiciled everywhere I go in America. If I go to Arizona right now for a weekend, I'm domiciled in Arizona. I'm never a resident. Never. It is a legal impossibility for me to be a resident. In fact, I think by saying that I'm a resident, I should go to prison for perjury.
So what is
so to go back to the Washington D.C. can never become the 51st state because if it did, the Commerce Clause would collapse.
What if the Commerce Clause did collapse?
Well, it would destroy their own system. If they made Washington D.C. the 51st state, they would literally destroy everything. Driver's licenses would disappear. Business licenses would disappear. Concealed carry permits would disappear. 80% of the entire criminal code would disappear. Everything would disappear. Their whole system. They would basically be putting a shotgun in their own mouth and pulling the trigger.
So why are so many of the different things now saying just Washington? They've gotten rid of DC on Google Maps, on other maps, etc.
They're just trying to make it more confusing, but they're never going to make it into the 51st state. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's why they're doing Washington City, Washington. Yeah.
Can we do a bathroom break here? Would you guys mind?
Well, I think we need to wrap this up. So
Okay.
thank you. I appreciate it. Where so you're going to give me information as to where, and I'll put this in with the show information, how people can find you and how they can learn from you for all of the classes, because there's so much to unpack, so much without getting lost in all of the details. There's so much there. So
Yeah, it's hilarious. It's easy to remember. It's onestupidfuck.com. and we're just kind of scraping the tip of the iceberg here on this show, but you can kind of see where we're headed on a lot of the stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, all I do is just dig through stuff and dig through cases and dig up definitions and try to sort all this stuff out. So,
And if this was the last time you could speak publicly, what truth would you leave us with?
oh, I don't know. I mean, a U.S. citizen isn't an actual American, and a Federal Reserve note isn't really money.
There you go.
Simple as that. Wow. Wow. What a ride. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, guys.
Thing
Thank
to
you.
remind us about what we are, and yet another lie in the system that we need to look into. And it's always keeps our brain engaged, keep learning, keep thinking. And so thank you. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Thank you,
Appreciate
guys.
it.
Bye-bye.
Thank
all
you,
you
Leslie.
Thanks, Brandon, seriously.
do.
Really appreciate all you're doing.
Thank you.
So keep on, and stay grounded, stay open, stay sovereign. And I always end with, until next time, look up, stay positive, and be the light in someone's day. God bless everyone. Thank you.